Hey there! Welcome to Culture by Culture, a multidimensional exploration of Black and Asian pop cultural ties. I'm your host, and maybe even your bias, Delia. And today I'm joined by writer, affiliate faculty in African and African American Studies at George Mason University, and creator of KPK, K-Pop Collective, Dr. Crystal Anderson. Hi, Dr. A.
Hey, it's great to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. Please go ahead before we jump in and introduce yourself to the folks. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I am a longtime fan, first of all, of K-pop music. It's over 10 years. It's probably as long as I've been running KPK.
Wow.
But before that, I was and still am a fan of Chinese dramas. And on occasion, I've been known to watch some anime. And I'm a Black woman, so I think that's why I'm here. And kind of roll those kinds of interests. So I have a fan side, but then I also have a scholarly side. Because being someone who's familiar with that kind of popular culture and then taking that into the academic space, I think it's still very rare, and it lends a particular kind of insight to be able to translate between the academic world and the fan world. So, and I also wrote a couple of books. So
just a couple. Just throw that in. Actually, I'm going to ask about the book at some point, but I am actually on the waiting list for Soul in Seoul.
Wow, there's a waiting list.
Yeah, at our library, there's a waiting list here in DC, and I'm next. I checked before this recording this podcast. I was like, maybe I can get my hands on it before the podcast, but I'm literally next in line. I'm so excited. Well, thank you again so much for being here. So for background, everyone, if you'll know, a little while ago, I did a musical connections mini-series, and I was reaching out to people, and it was actually while I was doing some research for one of the episodes, because if y'all know my show notes, I like to be thorough. I like to cite my sources. I stay on it. And in trying to find a source for a quote, it pulled up KPK K-Pop Collective, and I was like, what is this? Okay, interesting. I was like, wait, hold on. They're Black. Hold on. And so I immediately sent an email. I don't even know what time it was. It's very late at night. I was in the middle of editing, but I couldn't be stopped. I was so excited. So I'm very grateful for you making the time and coming on the podcast. I know you're a longtime fan. K-Pop Collective. That's also what's crazy to me, is that K-Pop Collective has been around a while. And I never heard it. You know, the internet is so siloed sometimes with the algorithm. Actually, I'm lying. I did say I haven't heard of it, but that's apparently a lie, because when I was on your site, we're getting into some background. So on your site, you cite your speaking appearances. And while I was looking, I was like, wait, she's been on Mama? Like the award show? If you know, you know. And I was like, but I've watched all of them. And then I went and found the clip. I was like, oh my gosh, I have. So I guess I can't say I haven't totally heard about it. I just forgot. So all of that said, I would love to know your K-pop origin story, because a 10-year-long fan that is something to brag about, in my opinion.
Sure. So I actually got into K-pop from Chinese dramas, which is why I mentioned them. So big fan of Kung Fu films. I have two other older brothers. There was Saturday morning Kung Fu when I was growing up. And so when I became an adult, I'm like, I can watch as much Kung Fu as I want to. And then I stumbled into these Chinese dramas with these fabulous women and these elaborate hairdos. And
yes, oh my gosh, the hair.
It was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And these 80 episode sagas. I'm like, this is great. And I was watching them through Netflix, and then I literally ran out of them to watch the ones that were subtitled.
Oh my goodness.
And Netflix, ever helpful, it's like, watch this thing, you'll like it. And that thing was Boys Over Flowers. Yes, the gateway K-drama.
Exactly what I was about to say.
For us all. And so I'm like, okay, click. And then I watched the first episode, and I'm like, I'm not too interested in the female lead. But when they walked into the school, I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? Completely and totally hooked. And so, when you're watching Boys Over Flowers, there's always the musical interlude. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of groovy. That's kind of great. I was talking to a colleague of mine, and her sister-in-law also watches K-dramas, and she goes, "You know that guy's in a group, right?" I'm like, "What guy's in a group?" Let me go to the internet and find out what this group is. And that group was SS 501. And I watched not even the full group, just the subgroup, because they had a promotion at it wasn't even at the time, because you know how things are like not really in sync with time. Like when you discover a thing, that thing has been existing for quite some time, but it's new to you.
Right.
So it's new to me. And so I'm watching this video, Your Man, and I'm like, this is like MTV back in the day. They had choreo. There were costume changes. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. I'm like, but you know what? I'm just going to stick with the one group, right? Yeah, no, that lasted like
Famous
2
last
seconds. Because then I found Super Junior. And I'm like, what is this? And then I just completely went down that rabbit hole. And so, yeah, from Chinese dramas to K-dramas to K-pop, that is my K-pop origin story.
That is so interesting. I have talked about it on the podcast. I have not super dipped my toe into the world of Chinese dramas, just because it's like there's only so much time to consume all of the media, but I've had a lot recommended to me. So it's interesting to me that you ended up over here on quote unquote this side of fandom through Chinese dramas. But I've got my eye on the Chinese dramas. Everybody knows I've been eyeballing them. So I guess they don't have in Chinese dramas like the same sort of, like the OST is a big part of K-dramas. Like it is integral to a K-drama. So I guess that's not as much the same in Chinese dramas.
There's an opening theme song and a closing theme song, which is usually done by either someone in the drama or some really big, famous, recognizable person. But no, there's not that kind of synergy you get between K-drama and K-pop, especially at that time, right? Because Boys Over Flowers had everybody and their brother in it. Like it was just like the greatest one-stop shop to get into K-pop, you know, until like something else. Like there are other like gateway K-dramas. There's Coffee Prince, there's My Lovely Samsoon, which was second on my list. But if you got hit by the Boys Over Flowers K-drama first, then you also got hit with a substantial amount of K-pop as well.
It really is. I hadn't put it in those words, but that's so true. It's very much a Korean pop culture one-stop shop in a way, like a microcosm of like, here's everything you need to know. Gateway. So, okay, that makes sense how you got from Chinese dramas to K-dramas. My next question is then, how do you jump from I love K-pop to, you know what, I'm going to make a whole collective about it and I'm going to start looking at K-pop through an academic lens?
Sure. So I blame students. So I'm just listening to my K-pop, you know, watching my K-dramas, and I let it slip during class that, yeah, I'll listen to K-pop, and just kind of went on with my first day of class spiel. And then I had a couple of colleagues who knew that I was, you know, listening to K-pop. And at that point, I was starting to think, because we're, as academics, we can't turn it off. So we're asking questions. And my co-conspirator in KPK, Katrina Davis Kendrick, came into the picture when I was like, we need to do something with this. This was when students started coming to my office and literally camping out just to talk about K-pop. And I'm like, I have a job, so I need to make this part of the job. We just can't chit chat about K-pop all day, every day. So we were talking, and we were talking about, you know, everybody else's origin story with K-pop. And one of the first things you need as a K-pop fan is information. You need to know who's who. You need to know who your bias is. You need to know who your bias wrecker is. Like, you just need information. And
so true.
We love a young K-pop fan because that's who was providing the information. And truth be told, still, they're the ones who are running these sites that has all of the information and keeping up with your faves.
They in the streets, in the K-pop streets.
They are. But the thing is, it was scattered, and it wasn't always accurate, and very little of it was in a way where you could see the development of your group or see your connection to other groups or see where your group came in the history of the development of K-pop as a whole.
So true, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we thought, hey, we'll do this. We'll create some profiles with some discographies and some videography so that you're getting, all the information that you could. And then there was Katrina Davis Kendrick with her librarian cape on, talking about, hey, did someone say information? She's also a SHINEE fan. So after hours long conversations about just the K-pop, because you got to get that out of the way, we got down to how can we present this information in a way that users who aren't academics, because there's the fan element to it, but we're still asking questions, right, about how do you present the information? How does the way you present the information impact what people know? And then we became ridiculously knowledgeable about K-pop itself, but then saw that there was a really large difference between what we were seeing and then the way that K-pop was being talked about in the media. And so we were like, hey, let's do a study. Woohoo! Let's collect some data to see if what we're thinking is actually right. So, one of the big questions early on was, why do people like K-pop? People meaning people outside of Korea, because I guess they just assume that people inside Korea like K-pop. So that was the burning question. So we're like, we'll just ask it, right? Because people were making assumptions about who K-pop fans were, why they were K-pop fans, how they acted. And so we're like, we'll just ask. And so we ran that study for 4 years. And so I still think that we have the longest year study on K-pop fans, and that data that we collected, I would argue, is radically different if we ran that same study today.
Interesting.
Because fans have completely changed. We can see it. And if somebody wanted to document that through a study, they could, but I could tell you the fans are different. And so what we got back was, overwhelmingly, we thought that we were going to get back, we like them because they're cute. And they are.
Oh, for sure.
That wasn't the primary thing. It wasn't the primary. The primary thing was always the music. It's catchy. We like it. The music. And we were just kind of like, okay, let's take a look at the music, because literally no one was talking about the music. It was always the performance, the choreography, the beauty, the clothing. It was literally everything except the music. So that's when I started looking at the music. But KPK was really kind of developed to create ways in which people could learn about K-pop in a systematic kind of way. And our system has kind of changed over the years. But also, once we've looked at it in that systematic way, the kinds of patterns that we see, the kinds of questions that we ask, fueled the scholarly part of KPK.
It's so funny. I have some academic friends, and I can just hear them being like, yeah, that's academic life. It naturally flows into, yeah, we should do a study on this. Like, it seems like a big jump to if you're out on the outside, but this is very academic behavior. I love it. And I think it's so true about nobody talks about the music. I think it's getting to be more so that people are, but that's always been what's so interesting to me, especially as a Black K-pop fan, the musicality of it. Because I think maybe not obvious to people who aren't K-pop fans, but if you're a Black K-pop fan, like, you can hear those references. Like, they're very clear. I don't think maybe white fans, for example, may be able to discern it as easily, but it's very obvious. So I've always been so curious about the musicality as somebody who grew up playing music. And not a lot of people talk about it. And I find that really, really interesting, which is also why I'm very excited to read your book, as I said, Soul and Soul, which I didn't explain at top. So if you can't tell by the title, it covers the incorporation of musical and performative elements of Black music and culture within K-pop. And I wanted to know if you had any good examples for those who aren't familiar, because I do have a lot of fans of K-pop who listen to the podcast, but there are a lot of people who are coming to it with fresh eyes. So do you have any good examples for them of, like, Black music or culture being referenced within K-pop?
Sure. So it might help to kind of do it chronologically.
Let's go.
Because it's there from the beginning. Like it's, but I would stop to say that anybody who's really a student of popular music, like all kinds of popular music, will be able to hear this. And so just as a tangent, one of my favorite subgenres of YouTube video, there are two of them. One is, I've never heard this song. It's my first time listening to X.
Oh, I love
Fascinating. I'm like, really? This is your first time ever hearing Whitney Houston? What rock have you been under?
Right. Oh, it's so fascinating.
I'm just super fascinated by that. So that's one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, though, are, I don't want to call them no-name producers because they have names and they have like long lists of credits, but you wouldn't know them like walking down the street. That's so-and-so who worked on whatever record. But these people make YouTube videos and they have this encyclopedic knowledge of just music beyond genre. So I'm like, these two things are existing on YouTube at the same time. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
So I want to put out there that you can be a student of popular music and hear this. Like my mom, I wouldn't call her a student of popular music, but our family is very musical. So it's like, yeah, if you heard some James Brown, you can hear this in K-pop.
Right.
So we want to make sure that we recognize that there are people who aren't Black and can hear this too. It's not like, it's a genetic thing that only Black people can hear it. Like, but to me, like I'm trying to think about the first time I have to make another caveat too. So when we say Black music, I think that it's important to understand how pervasive Black music is. Like, we're not making it up when we say, if you're going to incorporate anything that's rock, soul, techno, house, like Black music is like all of that. So when we hear it, we're hearing it in a lot of different places. And I'm trying to think of the first time that I really said, okay, this might be a book. So there's a song by Shinhwa that has this spoken word intro to it. Like the soul, like, hey girl, like, and Eric goes on for like a good 30 seconds, like, oh my gosh, we need to talk. I don't think this is going to work out. I'm sorry. And we would play that just over and over and over. One, it tickles me so much because it just cracks me up. But that's when I knew, okay, we're not talking some superficial, let's just get what's popular now. You had to go and like listen to some like Drifters or something to get that kind of stuff on the record. And the thing is, they would repeatedly do it. So it wasn't just like a one-time thing. You would repeatedly hear this if you listen to a lot of K-pop, which we did, like a ridiculous amount of K-pop. So there's lots of, and I like to start with the older genres. Because it's easy to say, well, of course you hear hip hop and K-pop because, hip hop is the dominant genre of popular music. But then what accounts for covers of Bill Withers by 2 p.m. or what accounts for samples of Hall & Oates by G.O.D. or what accounts for, samples of Sound of Philadelphia by Dynamic Duo or interpolations by Brown Eyed Soul. Like Brown Eyed Soul, literally, I feel like they're contractually obligated to put soul in the title of every album they put out because they seem to. Like, we want you to know we named the group Brown Eyed Soul for a reason. And
we know the roots.
Yes, Soul Cook, Soul. I'm like, okay, we got it. Soul, you're down for it. So it's not just that you hear it sprinkled around. You hear it, and I like to use the term cited with not just regularity, but with intention and in the right way. Like, which means you've listened to a lot of it and you know how this is supposed to go. So it's hard to find like specific examples because there's so many.
Right.
But if you want to see like the from the very, very beginning, G.O.D's first track or first hit, Observation, has a breakdown in the middle that samples from the Ohio Players' Love Roller Coaster.
Interesting. Okay.
And so I'm just kind of like, cool. Like,
we know what y'all are listening to. Okay.
And the thing is that configuration with, you know, Kim Tae-woo's like deep soulful voice and their plethora of rappers, that interplay is something you can hear throughout their discography. Even when they did their kind of reunion comeback, it's still there, and then they make fun of it, and so it's just kind of a great thing because they know we know and we know they know, and everyone knows, and it's great. And so, you know, you can hear it through samples, you hear it the use of R&B vocals, you hear it through the use of R&B instrumentation, so genres like funk music, genres that are kind of bluesy in their use of like guitar or rhythm. And so if you listen to a lot of Black music, you'll find yourself playing the game. What does this sound like in K-pop? What does this sound like? Is this what I think it is? This sounds like something. In fact, Trina did a whole series on KPK, what you're listening to when you're listening to K-pop, and she would break it down. Her original bias was Rain, and so she had a really great time.
Oh my gosh,
doing that with the godfather of solo K-pop
I know,
artists.
my heart fluttered. Okay.
And so it's just you really hear it at the beginning, and I would say you hear it throughout all the generations, but you really hear and see it. So it's not just the music, it's the performance. So look at those choreographies, look at the styling in the music videos. I mean, they scream 1990s.
For sure. First gen? Oh my gosh. There are some looks. I encourage people to go look. It's amazing.
It is. It's a whole thing. But the thing is, they never let it go. Like I always said, like they could have chosen any music to base their music on. Why not country? It's
We'll leave it at that. It's a question.
You know, why not rock music like Japan did?
Sure, yeah. Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
What is it? And one of the things is, it's not a thing that you can like prove scientifically, but having talked to a lot of people and talk to the way that the people hear the music, and to know how huge of a singing culture Korea is, I think that there's an emotional connection in the music because we know music has an emotional element to it. And I think that's what resonated. Not just resonated with Koreans because it resonates with a lot of people around the world, but at that particular time in Korea's history, really resonated with them because, you know, once you witness your government go from military authoritarianism to democracy, you might want a soundtrack for that.
And so quickly too. I cannot, if y'all aren't at home familiar with Korea's history, it's so quick. It's stunning, really. And the cultural works that have come as a result of that are just fascinating to me. But that's kind of an aside. And I so agree with being able to hear these references. That's why for me, I really love K-R&B. Like I love K-pop in general, but like K-R&B specifically, there's just such a direct connection that you can hear. I mean, there's a connection in all of it. I'm not saying that there's not, of course, but like for me, that's where I hear it the most personally. I'm like, oh, y'all are like about this life for real though. Like it's so real. And same for hip hop artists, especially when you like move to like strictly Korean hip hop artists. Because you can hear it in K-pop a little bit, but obviously just like here, like popular music is a certain thing and it gets more specific in the specific genre. So I feel like when you get into the specific genres outside of K-pop within Korean music, you can hear it even like distilled even stronger. And I think that's just so cool to me. So with that said, I want to know what your thoughts are as far as why you think it's important to talk about and remember. Because I know personally, as a fan, I've, experienced the whole gamut of like straight up racism to other people are like, this doesn't matter. We're here for these groups, all of that. So why do you think it's important for us to talk about Black culture's influence and to remember it and call it out?
I think it's important because if we look at a genre like rock music, we know why it's important. Every rock historian will tell you, of course, rock music comes from Black music. But the general perception is still, and people will occasionally do a survey just to check, and it's like, yep, still this way. Most people do not associate Black people with rock music. And if it's just not accurate, like, you want to know the full gamut of the music that you're listening to. And I love connections, right? I love it when you find out some nugget about some song you've been listening to, and like, it just fascinates me and tickles me that Luther Vandross was on background vocals on this David Bowie track.
Oh,
and
I love that. Yes.
I love this kind of stuff. And so I think that and this is the academic kind of coming back in, but I think it was also important to me, just when I'm a fan, it's like, you want to know everything. And so, because that's how it is. That's why it's important. You want to know all, and you want to give credit and acknowledge, because I know everybody wants everybody to get the credit they deserve. So I think it's important to know where this music comes from, and that there's still a lot of people who don't know the roots of this music. And this goes for all music. Black music also, I used to tell my students, the Black music is not as Black as you think, because if you go back and look at who were in these recording booths, these session players, but also people who were just writing songs for other people on other people's tracks, it's really interesting in the United States, especially during the era of segregation and the neo-segregation that followed. The music was still a place where you could find these interactions happening. And so it's important because that's the story. And we want the story to be as comprehensive and correct as we can get it. So it's just a no-brainer to me that we need to know these things.
I struggle so much with planning content for this podcast because I have an interest in music, and like you were saying, the history of Black music in general is a history of a lot of collaboration across races, partly due to the history of how Black people could enter spaces in general, but it creates this interesting interplay like you're talking about. And I've discovered so many different, connections, because that's what this podcast is about when it comes to pop culture, that I'm like, okay, the whole podcast can't be about music, but like there's so much over the course of Black music, the history of Black music, and thusly the history of American popular music, because I've said this on the podcast before, and it is a bit of a like it's definitely a broad statement, but that American popular culture is Black popular culture. Like, Black popular culture feeds into almost every facet of American popular culture, and that's what we end up exporting out. So even if you're looking at today K-pop artists who are like 18 trainees and stuff, they may not literally be listening to Black music, although they probably are. But even if they're not, because they're listening to American popular music, that is still informed by the history of Black music. So I think the work that you do is so important, because I think it's very easy for that to get lost. And like you said, it happens all the time. Like, I grew up listening to rock. Like, I was a rock girly. I also was like a J-pop girly. So, and it's just wild that space is not seen as Black. I had a band, they do anime covers here in DC, called Sheila, and they were talking about being, a Black band in this space, and how, navigating that, which is wild because rock music was originally Black music. It's wild. And so I agree that it's incredibly important. And I hope that it's changing, but from your perspective as a longer time fan than I am, I've not been into K-pop as long, unfortunately. I was slow on I was slow on the uptake. But how has our understanding of Black people's influence on K-pop changed over time, at least here in America?
Ah, yeah, America. So, so I think it's interesting. I think it's useful to look at it in terms of when K-pop moves to the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you noted, subculture life is way different. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Black people have been into every permutation of Asian popular culture over the trajectory since the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And so when K-pop came along, we're like, oh yeah, cool. And the subculture space is very different from the mainstream culture space.
Mm-hmm.
It tends to be a little bit more accepting of diversity, which is why, my colleague Trina, the way she got to K-pop was through Bollywood. Like, everybody kind of makes a certain kind of interesting, trajectory to get them. But what we found in that original research was a lot of people who were K-pop fans were already fans of a foreign popular culture. So the whole subtitle language thing didn't bother them.
Right.
So whether you were coming from Chinese drama or Bollywood or anime or wherever else you were coming from, you're like, yeah, okay, language, next. Like, so those are the kinds of things that are always at play in subgenres. And some people would argue it's because there's not, I have to make a caveat here.
Please do.
As much commercial interest in it. Like, we know that there are people who are making money off of sub-genre type things.
Sure.
But compared to the mainstream, I think is really radically different, probably due to the extent that it happens. But once you move into the mainstream, and I can't remember who said it, Miranda Larson, she said it at a K-Con. She said, you know what? No one cared about K-pop in the US until white teenage girls started to like it.
Okay. I'm just saying.
And so the dynamics of the mainstream are very different. And, my Marxist friends would argue that it's all about capitalism and profit. And yeah. But in the United States, we also know that mainstream space has been shaped by certain historical and cultural forces. I mean, we are a country who has a history of slavery and segregation. And the after effects of both of those things continue to impact and shape our lives on a daily basis. This is not to say that Black people wake up every day and look in the mirror and go, yeah, history, slavery, segregation. Okay, time to go.
Yeah, I don't wake up every morning looking in the mirror like I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams.
But if you look at the history of mainstream popular culture, and it probably is the case in a lot of other countries as well, the perceived mainstream space looks a certain kind of way. And then that discourse becomes the dominant discourse, and it's really difficult to have an alternative discourse next to that. And we know that it tends to flatten because we've seen it happen. We've seen it happen with hip hop. We've seen it happen with a whole bunch of other musical traditions. And that's what it does. It homogenizes, if you will.
Yeah.
So all of these details and caveats and nuances get lost. And then the audience, or the perceived audience, gets portrayed in a particular kind of way. And so in the United States, when people talk about K-pop, as I said, one of the reasons why we started KPK is because the way that, this was back in 2011, 2012, we could already see, who people tended to talk to, what they tended to talk about. All of that shapes what people think K-pop is, to the extent that I have a mentor of mine, very learned academic, after my book came out, tell me, because you need to make sure that they talk about the source of their music. I'm like, wait, what? have you not heard me like talk about K-pop during the whole years I was writing this book? So no one's really immune to it once that dominant discourse takes place. And that dominant discourse is often lacking nuance and increasingly misleading and incomplete.
You really spoke to my soul. Firstly, I will say I was hoping that, obviously, I'm like, maybe it's gotten better over time. Like maybe we've made inroads, but also what you're speaking to is, it felt so validating hearing it. And I think especially fans of color who might be listening, it'll validate their experiences, because that has been something that's been so frustrating to me personally. It's being a fan of this music, being able to hear those connections that we were talking about earlier, and then having friends, while meeting friends, it's not even their fault really, but fellow like other Black friends and other friends who are people of color saying things like that, like, well, they need to make sure like that they aren't already doing that, because, and it's so true of the dominant narrative, like who are we talking to, what fans are we showcasing, like that is so interesting having it put that way, because even though I was experiencing it, I hadn't really drawn it all together so succinctly as you put it. Thank you very much. And it's so true, and it can be very frustrating, I think. So I guess that does lead kind of perfectly into my next question, of what has been your experience over the years as a Black fan in K-pop personally?
Oh, wow. So interestingly enough, there are two experiences, right? There's the online experience, and then there's the real life experience.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So one of the things that in the real life experience, it was great because, say you went to a concert, Trina and I went to see SHINEE in Dallas. And so, because, you know, we're old ladies, we had to sit in the car because we weren't going to stand in that line to get into the venue. So we're sitting there, we're watching all the younger, more ably fit people go stand in line, and it was really diverse. Like it wasn't like, what are those Black guys doing there? And there were Black guys at that SHINEE concert.
100%.
What are those Black guys doing? It's like, oh yeah, there's those Black guys and there's those girls and those guys over there. And it's like, hey, it was great. So and remember, this is, when did we go see SHINEE? Like 2018 we went to see SHINEE? That's not right. That's too late. Maybe 2016 we went to see SHINEE. It was incredibly diverse in real life. But think about how often fans get that real life experience, because most people's fandom experience like K-pop happens on the internet. And now we get to the problem, right? Because the internet's gonna internet. And that is so true, and it doesn't cease to be true for K-pop fans. The way that the internet is just say what you want to say with no repercussions, act as an authority, even though you may not have any knowledge whatsoever. As the kids like to say, they say it with their full chest. It's like loud and wrong, loud and wrong. And because I've watched this now for over a decade, the internet used to be a place where K-pop fans, all that mattered was you were a fan of the group. We're all fans together. And this would actually happen more frequently in more closed off internet spaces. So in forums, on listservs, on places where you needed a password to get in, on Facebook groups. But when you're talking about on the wild web, like Twitter,
formerly known as Twitter.
Yes, formerly known as Twitter. Like that's where you saw all of the negative parts of the intersection between fandom and social media come to the fore. And for people who have, because I've watched it happen to people, I've talked to people after it happened to them, that also shapes the discourse of what you can and what you can't say about K-pop. And that's bad from a scholarly point of view, because everybody's not speaking. Like, you know, usually you want everybody gets to speak, and you can filter out who has the most information and therefore come to some kind of reasonable consensus. But there's an active silencing, and it's not just going on the internet, it's going on in academia too. And so we are not getting that kind of full spectrum treatment of K-pop. So as a fan, as a Black fan, I kept my fan circle small.
It's almost what you have to do.
It's like, who are you? Are you okay? Are you? Because I'm like, yeah, because it's like, and no greater feature on Twitter than there is as the block and mute button.
And crucial.
And now it's just like, I've heard so many people say, I'm just going to stop being a K-pop fan. I can't deal with all of the negativity and the toxicity. And it's not just K-pop. I mean, you see this in a lot of other fandoms. Don't get me started on Star Wars. You see it like just all over the place. And so the greatest feature of the internet has also become the worst feature of the internet when it comes to people and their fandom, and particularly if you are a Black fan of literally anything. I saw some people going at it over knitting. I'm like, really?
Knitting?
Okay.
All right, everyone. Okay, let's all just take a fiver, log off. We can't be fighting about knitting right now. Yeah, that's been my experience in fandom broadly too. Like, it's just the online space. I've talked about it on this podcast, my experience with K-pop fandom, but especially I had an episode with Grace, June's Melanin Drop. She's a social media account that covers BTS specifically, but through she's an activist, but also social justice, socialism, like through that lens. She does a lot of thoughtful analysis. She's a grad student, all that stuff. Anyway, she's great. But we talked about this, about, feeling like you can't say things. And she gets so much hate for certain things that she says, and her peers who are trying to have these same conversations. And even in that episode, even from my limited time in fandom spaces in general, I was censoring myself, and I said it. I was like, you can hear me not saying things because I just don't want those problems, because there is an act of silencing, and not just a silencing, but policing how you can say the things that you are going to say. Like, okay, if you're going to critique them, you have to make sure to hit all of these points before you even get to the critique. It's wild. So it is very hard as a Black fan, and keeping the circle small is generally my advice to Black fans in the internet space of anything, not just K-pop, but especially K-pop. It's really rough. And I feel like I wonder if your perception is that it's gotten worse the more it goes into the mainstream, because I think these spaces are so easy to access, and it's so easy to put an avatar and hide who you are and just say whatever. Maybe that's just my experience, but that's what I've been seeing, I feel like.
I think there's also more at stake in the mainstream. It's like, when it was a subculture, it's like, okay, I like this group and you like that group. And it's like, okay, whatever. Like, there's enough K-pop for all of us. Like, there were no stakes. In the mainstream, now there are stakes. There are records, there's charts, there's streams, there's views, we need to determine who's number one. And it's so interesting to me, because I remember being a K-pop fan when there was no chart.
Man.
It literally did not matter. When I got to Double S 501, they were already on hiatus. So how am I going to be out in a K-pop street talking about their number one? I'm like, it just didn't matter. I'm over here on LimeWire trying to get me some K-pop.
LimeWire, yes. None of this. Make sure you stream on Bugs and YouTube.
It just was not a thing. And now it is. And this is what I mean when I say when things move into the mainstream, other things come into play that aren't in play when they are, to a certain extent, in subcultures, which is why you will hear a lot of K-pop fans say they never wanted K-pop to be as popular.
I feel that. Yeah, I feel that for sure. And it kind of, there's this, I think, especially coming from being in the mainstream in America in particular, anytime people of color in general are trying to hit that mainstream approval, there becomes a scarcity mindset, which in my opinion is bred from white supremacy. Like, oh, we've got 5 slots for people of color. Yes. So use them well. And so we know in America, at the very least, not all of our favorite K-pop groups are going to make it to the top just because the way our society is set up, it will not allow for that. So there can, it feels like, only be one. Now, how important is that? I don't know, but
in the grand scheme, I'm going to say it. In the grand scheme of things, it's not important because you pick any year. What was the number one song 5 years ago?
Right. You have no idea.
No one knows. No one knows, which means it does not matter. And here's the other thing. I spent far too much time on YouTube, but it's fascinating to me. So I watched somebody randomly, because, that's how the algorithm is, the best 100 songs from 1975. I'm like, really? Let's see who's on this. And what I found was, it wasn't the number one 100s. It was just, this was what was out in the zeitgeist in 1975. If you were listening to music, this is what you were listening to. And I'm like, how diverse is this list? How incredibly, because yes, if you were in 1975, you would have been bumped in some kind of way. You would have heard this. You ever think to yourself, you're in a store and a song comes on and you're like, how do I know this?
Yes, all of the time.
Like, I know this song, but you don't even know how you know it, but you do. This is the big, I think, seismic shift that's happening in K-pop, is that you don't have that anymore because people aren't inadvertently exposed to things they wouldn't normally listen to themselves. And so we're just this race in only the attention on who's number one and why do we care. We're missing all of the other stuff that you actually should be listening to, whether you like it or not, or whether that's your fave or not, so that you could be standing somewhere. It's like, oh yeah, like I heard a K-pop song. I'm like, who is this? And how do I know this song? Because somebody made like a CD for me and they put this song on and I listened to it, and it may not be my favorite, but it's in kind of my repository of music that I know and ostensibly like. I mean, it's got a good beat. I still don't know who that person is, but like, it's kind of cool. So when you reduce the number of people who are in a fandom who have that kind of residual knowledge, then the music itself starts to get smaller. So now when you hear people say, oh, all the K-pop songs sound alike, why is that? How much music knowledge do you have? And why? I mean, it might be. I've heard this from several people. 4th gen is a bit of a jumble right now.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So, my like real, like I know that they're there and I know who they are, but it's really hard to know them and say things about them like we can with like 2nd gen and 3rd gen, right? But it's like one thing that we have seen is a reduction in the variety of sounds that we get. And so I saw a clip from SM's new boy group, and I'm like, why do you sound like a cross between NCT and Stray Kids? Like, that's just what came to my head. And I'm like,
you saying there's a new boy group from it? I'm like, there is? Okay, see, I lost on me. Okay.
And it feels radically different than when SM debuted EXO. Because first there was like 23 teaser trailers for for each of the members. Then you had these pre-debut songs that weren't debut songs, but they were songs, and you were like, oh, that's kind of groovy, but that's not the debut song yet. I'm like, what do you mean that's not the debut song yet? It was a whole big production. So when they dropped, and I know there are people who are like, Mama was not their cup of tea. I'm like, that might not be your cup of tea, but What Is History might be your cup of tea. And it's like, that was just all part, like they weren't done. EXO wasn't done. Like they were still kind of gooey in the middle. But they were done enough where you're like, okay, that's an SM group. And I am not getting this vibe from RIIZE. And I'm like, are we just thinking solely commercially?
That's my
and I know
fear.
the music business is a business. So you It's not
Sure.
like, profit, but that's not the only thing that's at play for the best popular music we have. And I feel like when that's the only thing in play, then that's when you're going to start to get stuff that sounds a lot alike. And I would die on the hill. Like, no, K-pop does not all sound the same for first, second, and third gen. I'm like, no.
No, it does not. Oh, no. Oh, for sure not.
Doesn't.
Having a favorite group said a lot about your music taste in the earlier generations, like what type of music you were into.
It did. And then those groups interacted with each other, which I think people seem to forget. Like, Korea's not that big. It's not that big.
No. I've actually enjoyed seeing that, like, because a lot of the groups are now trying to like have trends on TikTok because that's what you have to do now. But in doing so, they collab with each other. I'm like, oh my gosh, y'all are talking to each other. Oh, thank gosh.
Right. So that's the upside. But listening, and one of the greatest things that's ever happened, I'm not going to say that the whole move to the mainstream is like sucks for everybody, but we did get something good out of it, and that's more behind the scenes footage.
Yes.
So now we get to see them in the studio, and I'm like, yes, because this just confirms what we said all along. This whole idea that idols are just puppets and they're just told to sing and they sing. They don't have any input. I'm like, I'm going to need you to watch this.
Exactly. What you said really made sense to me about there being, in the store, you hear a song, you're like, I have no idea how I know the song. And not only know the song, it'll be like, the words to the song.
You know the words to it.
Hell, how does that happen? But I think what you're talking about is that in general, that nowadays there is less opportunity to grab ears for music companies worldwide. Like, it's not just K-pop.
Right.
Like, there's less opportunity because everything's so curated to the end user. You're not driving stuck in rush hour and your mom's got the radio on and you're hearing these songs. Like, it's a curated playlist that you picked out yourself. And so I think in doing that, there has been a flattening. Like, I wish there wasn't, but I do think there's been a flattening because they need to make sure they can grab your ear, and they know, and to do that, they have to do what works because the algorithm is going to recommend you things you already like.
Yes.
So there has been this flattening over time, whereas back when I'm not even that old, but talking like this makes me feel like back in my day, but back when you were listening to the radio, like when your mom picked you up from school, the radio was on, or like around the house, maybe she's cleaning and she's got the TV on, but there's songs in those shows and stuff, or MTV even. Like, there's opportunities for a song that you would have never chosen yourself to hit your ear and be like, what's going on there, for bands to take a risk and it to pay off. And that's not happening as much anymore. And like, there's new avenues like TikTok and these things, and we'll see how those play out. But right now I do think it's a flattening, and that's, in my opinion, to the detriment of K-pop, but then also affects how we're talking about these things as fans and what we're interested in and what we're defending and how we're defending it. So I wonder, from your perspective, having both as a fan who's been in the fandom for a long time, but also as an academic who's actually done the work of studying these things, what do you think is the most productive way for us as fans to talk about these issues in K-pop, whether it's the cultural appropriation or the genuine Black influence, and in general, the best way for us to advocate for these things as fans of color?
So here's the teacher in me coming out.
Please.
I always like to look at these as teaching opportunities. And
Okay.
I know, when you're in the fandom and you're in there, you're like, I understand it. Emotions run high. But I used to tell my students, I'm like, do you listen to somebody who's yelling at you? Like, you tend to not listen to anything anybody has to say if they're yelling at you. So that's not really the most effective way to exchange information. So that's why KPK was such a big, important thing, because I refuse to argue with anybody on the internet because everyone loses when you do that. So I'm like, listen, I'm just like, whenever I hear that kind of, the charge of cultural appropriation, I'm like, do tell me more about that. Like, what is it that you're looking at that makes you feel that kind of way? And then I say, well, here's what I know. I'm not even trying to change your mind. I'm just trying to enlarge your perspective so that then you can grapple with whatever your current opinion is and this new piece of information. So that's my goal, to give people new pieces of information and to show how things are connected. Because as we know, a lot of times people have these opinions or they say things and they don't have enough information to say that. And incredibly, you will see all kinds of things just floated out there like fact. And you're like, are you joking? Because you can't possibly. And then there are people who say things just to get people riled up, and they know exactly what to say, and they're looking for that kind of, unhinged response to something. So I like to give people like more information, just so they can see from my perspective, it looks a little bit differently. So when I hear a lot of younger fans talk about cultural appropriation, I'm like, well, here's what I know about cultural appropriation. And then we take a trip back to the 1860 something in the United States, and to talk about Black culture and its very complicated relationship to American culture, and what that looks like over time. And then to hit the spot that everybody, generally bases their cultural appropriation argument in the 1950s and the 1960s, and Black artists and the mainstreaming of Black music, Black pop music, right? In that moment where you literally had white artists watered down and completely erased Black pioneers. I'm like, okay, so now let's take this to K-pop. And of course, there are always going to be, things that don't happen this way. But for the most part, this is what I've found. One of the greatest things that we've gotten, again, from the mainstream and the K-pop is more information. So now before stuff comes out, you get the visualizer, right? And you get my favorite thing in the world, song credits. I am a sucker for song credits because I'm all up in there. I'm like, I want to know who's on this record. I want to know who's making this music. And when you look at song credits long enough, now you start to see, oh, this person wrote this thing, and they're on this thing too, and they're on this thing. And one thing that K-pop, by and large, did that white companies and labels did not do in the 1950s is go to the source and cite that credit. So if you're a K-pop fan and you missed it, that's not on the industry, that's on you. You need to go find this. And it's not just the individual fans' fault. The industry, when we went to digital music and we ditched the liner notes.
Oh, it's been so frustrating. Like, as somebody who loves to research, oh, Lord.
Really? So now you got to go through all kinds of things to try to figure out who's on this record. So they brought in actual Black producers and actual Black choreographers, and you can see them. And so now it's like, well, now it's gotten a little bit more complicated, right? This charge of cultural appropriation. So I like to give, the more information people have, the more they have to think. And so for me, that's always, not always, because I'm a person, but it's often my response, like, well, do you still feel that way if I tell you this? What about this? What about this? But then I have to be able to pull things out of my bag, right? To be able to show them. So that's why being more expansive in terms of what you listen to, because really, like, sometimes I'm like, do I even need a degree to do this? Because the only reason why I know X is because my aunt was playing it in her house when I went to see her, or my grandma had this on because she was, there's a research project to be had about Black people who are real familiar with AM radio. Because they stay with grandmas who listen to AM. I'm like, I should know who Lawrence Welk is. What is this? But yeah, to me, that's it. And I think the other thing is people need to just listen to more stuff. Because I don't know if I can even have a conversation with you if you haven't heard any Whitney Houston. Like, Again.
I mean, that's probably true for some people in Gen Z. I mean, okay, fine, fair enough. They are quite young, but that's wild to me to even conceptualize.
I'm going to start making a list of crazy things I hear on the last crazy thing that I heard on the internet. Somebody was like, I guess there was a picture of Beyonce and Diana Ross because it was Beyonce's birthday.
Yeah, at the Renaissance tour, yeah.
And somebody said, what kind of songs does Diana Ross have?
Nobody can see me, but my jaw just dropped. But see, that's what I'm talking about. The less opportunity to grab ears, because I am not the age range where that was listening to Diana Ross, like as Diana Ross was coming out. But because I have parents who were listening to music, the radio existed in its like original form, not what it is today exactly. Like you pick up on these pieces of pop culture that I'm like, y'all don't know who Diana Ross is, but they really don't, because they've just grown up with cell phones and everything being curated to them. And that's so problematic.
It really is. And so one of the things that I would suggest, because, I just don't want to be like, it's a problem. What's wrong with you? Mm-hmm. Talk to other people and expand the people that you talk to. Because the other thing that we found in that original research is when we asked, how did you find out about K-pop? Not why do you like K-pop, but how did you find out about K-pop? A good chunk of people found out about it through a friend.
Mm-hmm.
So people who are out there forcing their friends to listen to K-pop, good job.
Evangelizing K-pop. That's how I first heard about K-pop. I didn't come to it till much later. And even coming to it much later, so I had a friend in high school told me about it, and I was like, yeah, but I'm kind of on my J-pop thing. Like, I'm good, which regrets. I have regrets. And then my little sister, we're 10 years apart, but when she was in late elementary school, middle school, she really got into BTS. It was like 2012, 2013, 14, something like that. And she got so into it, eventually I was like, well, you know what? I want to bond with her. She seems to really like it. She's not got bad taste, even if she's younger than me. And here we are. Yeah, I really hope that we can see more nuance. Like that's something I talk about on the podcast a lot, especially when talking about cultural appropriation. Like I just think it's not to say it never happens. It's not to say like anti-Blackness is worldwide.
Right.
That's the real Mr. Worldwide is anti-Blackness. But I'm a big fan of nuance, and it's hard on the internet, but like I agree, if you could be the person in the room that just like nuance entered the chat, if you could be that person that just like sprinkles it in, because that's all we can do is plant seeds. And I will be the first to say, like, I am so bad at remembering this. I try really hard, but it is hard in the internet, especially when people come at you sideways.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to bow out. It's hard to know when and not to respond emotionally. And not because your emotions aren't valid, but it's just not productive on the internet. It just isn't, unfortunately.
It really isn't, which is why we need other spaces. That's why those secret spaces on the internet were super important, because you could work through those types of things. Or if you're in a friend group and and I used to have this conversation. I had a student, we would have this conversation. He's like, I love K-pop, but he's like, I can't, and he loves K-pop. He's like, but I can't get down with this. And I'm like, really? Let's talk about that. But see, we had like, days, weeks, months to have this, kind of conversation. I'm like, I'm not trying to change your mind, but I'm just giving you additional context so that you can work through this. But it is almost impossible to do that on Twitter.
Especially Twitter. But I think also, I'm not on TikTok, but from what I see, it's also hard to do on TikTok. And like,
it's not built for that. It's like you're fighting against the machine. It is not built for nuanced conversation. So that means we need to have podcasts. We need to have longer form things that kind of delve into it. And one of the upsides, I mean, YouTube has its issues, but it's interesting how YouTube keeps reinserting itself in the discourse or how people understand a thing, just because somebody can just get a camera and have an account and talk about things. There are some really great, nuanced, I don't want to call them think pieces.
Video essayists.
Yeah, just talking through things. And I'm like, we need more of that. we also need, I know this is going to sound real old school, we need more people to write about it. I have said K-pop needs, I used to say K-pop needs its own version of Rolling Stone, but I had to change that. K-pop needs its own version of Vibe magazine.
Ooh, okay.
We don't have that. So there's no, we have platforms and outlets, but we don't have, especially for the music, we don't have the Village Voice equivalent for K-pop. Like, people are like, you're just gonna listen to the music all day, every day. Just gonna listen to the music all day, every day, and just talk about it. So that vacuum means other stuff gets in there. And this is the other stuff.
I also think of, like, in anime and manga, we had Shonen Jump and Shoujo Beat, like something like that. That is so true. You don't have that in K-pop fandom, and K-pop fandom is so sprawling. Like, the fandom and the industry, to curate something would be so useful. Somebody listening, if you if you have the bandwidth, like, that would be really, really cool. And I agree about listening to long form. I love YouTube. I really do. Like, the only reason I'm not on it is video editing is not my ministry. That's why I'm a podcaster. But I love video essays. I love YouTube. And there's a lot of great content over there doing that work. And so I highly encourage people to check that out. And maybe I'll even link some of my favorites in the show notes. Always look to the show notes. I link cool stuff. That said, one last question, and it's always the hardest question. I always leave it for last, some variation of this. I was wondering if you could, I realize you probably couldn't give us your favorite K-pop group because that's hard, but maybe a favorite K-pop group from each generation?
Oh, gosh. Like, that makes
that's not that much easier. I know it's not that much easier,
okay.
But
it's so hard. Okay, so first gen, Shinhwa. I'm a Shinhwa girl.
Okay.
I'm a Shinhwa girl. They are fascinating to me, not just for their longevity, but I think Shinhwa was the first group to show us what it looks like when K-pop ages. I had this argument with a student of mine. I'm like, they're getting out of the military. Shinhwa's coming back. He's like, they're not coming back. I'm like, they said they would. They're coming back. And I waited, and there they were. And it was so fascinating to watch it now in this new kind of space for K-pop that gave us that insight. So I got to see them come back. They were goofy in that first concert that they did, because you can tell they didn't have a whole lot of time. Like, it was literally like somebody got out of the military, we're having a concert. Their record wasn't out yet, so I'm like, what are we having a concert for? But hey, let's watch this thing. And it wasn't as polished as people have come to expect K-pop to be. Go back and watch early Music Bank, man. That is an experience.
I went down a whole rabbit hole of early Music Bank days. It's a blast. I highly recommend it. It's so fun.
Right? So it wasn't as polished, but it was so great. So I'm a Shinhwa girl. I'm just going to name, I have a group of bias groups.
Okay,
so
let's do
Shinhwa, SHINEE, Super Junior, 17, VIX, Mamamoo, WeSung. I always forget somebody. Who is it? It's probably an S group. But it doubles 501.
Yeah.
See, I know, like, I always forget somebody. So my favorite groups go from, I wasn't a fan of first gen until I did first gen for the book. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is really interesting. And I feel like there's still a lot of stuff to mine in first gen, which is why I'm working on another book on K-pop. But yeah, a lot. I think it was the Boys Over Flowers thing. Second gen is just so, it's so good. It's so good. But yeah, my favorite, I try to listen to something from everyone. So the fourth gen groups, I know people are gonna fight. It's fourth, it's fifth. It's like, who knows? It's like, that's how history is.
Yeah, I think we're in the transition period, so we won't know till it's done.
Yeah, we won't know until it's done. But I find it watching a group like ATEEZ. I just this is so the styling. I'm like, y'all are thug pirates. I am so down for that.
It's so cool.
But you know, like the new-ish groups, it's just really interesting to see them try to, and I think people don't realize the first kind of generation we got to see like fully form in front of us was third gen, because second gen was already doing it. So when we got, you know, EXO and BTS and BAP, which, you know, people seem to forget, but that's a whole thing. You got to see that actual development. So you didn't know what it was going to be when it was done until it was done. And it's the same thing with fourth gen. It's like, we don't know what this is going to be until it's done. And it is not done yet. So it's really hard to talk about them, which is why my faves tend to be in first, second, and third gen. And 2 p.m. So there's some groups that I was like, okay, you're okay. And then I did the book and I'm like, oh
Hold
my gosh.
on.
2 p.m. was that group because I was like, yeah, whatever. Red, Grown, and number 5. That's grown people music. I'm like, who are you? What is this?
I need to, there is somebody who's been on the podcast, Black Girl Soul. One of them has gone down hard the 2 p.m. rabbit hole. So I constantly have 2 p.m. Stuff on my feed. And 2 p.m., that's for grown folks. That's for sure.
It is. And it's another dimension of K-pop that we don't talk about. If we think that the K-pop fan is a white teenage girl, then we're never going to get to 2 p.m.
Which is also, and then we'll wrap up, but it's wild to me that that's become the narrative in America, because it also surprises friends of mine who aren't into K-dramas or K-pop or anything like that when I'm like, no, like our K-pop is just their popular music, meaning like it's just on the radio. Like everybody's listening to it over there. Like Ajumas, Ajishis, like they're all listening to it. It's not like just the teenagers listening to it. Like here, teenagers and young people drive the popular culture, but that means there's music for everyone. So you can still get in where you fit in. It's very strange to me. How it's gone that way. I guess it's not strange hearing you explain it. That's just very American, isn't it? But the way the discourse and I'll have to find that quote you were talking about, how nobody cared about K-pop until white teens were into it over here in America, because that's a good quote. That's really resonant. Before we log off and get out of here, was there anything you wish I had asked, or is there anything you had hoped maybe we had more time for?
It's really hard because I will talk to you for K-pop for hours. I know people have gotten cornered by me, and their eyes do the "how can I escape" kind of thing. But you asked for it, so I just think it's really I stress to people that whatever you think K-pop is, it's way broader than that. And even people who are like you'll hear this a lot. It's like, no, I listen to K-rock. I don't listen to K-pop. I'm like, that's all under the same umbrella, bro. And the connections, once again, when you go digging into song credits, you're like, you're on this record? Oh my gosh, this is awesome. I think my perspective on K-pop owes a lot to Nile Rodgers from Chic. I follow him on Facebook. Because he is, and Netflix had this short-lived series where they would like talk to musicians, and there's an episode with Nile Rodgers, and he's talking about how he started out as a jazz musician, and he went over to dance music and never looked back. But for him, it wasn't really that much of a difference because he was doing the same things in a different kind of genre. And to hear him talk about all the different people that he worked with and how there's no, this person's better than that person, this person needed this. It was just like a whole great big thing. And then this is the last thing, I promise. So like, not this year, but last year, Nile Rodgers was on tour with Duran Duran, which was my first favorite all-time group. Oh, man. And then there's a whole project to be said about Black people who listen to Duran Duran.
Another book? Just kidding.
But that he was on part of the tour with them, and to see that synergy between the two of them. When musicians talk about music, they just talk about music. And I would like for us to do the same thing with K-pop, because I think that we would have so much more fruitful discussions if we could just talk about music like musicians talk about music.
Hopefully in a way, thanks to the mainstreaming, because we're getting more behind the scenes, hopefully that'll come to the forefront. Like, we're seeing the credits, we're seeing the process. I would love that too, because I love to, as somebody who, I don't consider myself a musician, but who grew up playing music. I played piano for like 15 years or something like that, saxophone. Like, I love to hear musicians, like real musicians, talk about music and approaching it from that lens, the artistry of it, if you will. Like, that's what's important to me. And I too would love to see that. So I'm so sorry we went over time, but thank you so much for joining me. I had so much fun. You're a wealth of knowledge. I highly encourage people. I did say I haven't read the book yet, and I usually abstain from recommending books before I've read them, but clearly Dr. A knows what she's talking about. I highly recommend you go check out her book, Soul in Seoul. You also have another book. I can't think of the name off the top. Chinese.
Beyond the Chinese Connection,
Yes.
Afro-Asian Cultural Production in a Global World. I don't know what the subtitle is. I keep forgetting it. Because I had a subtitle and then they changed it. So I always think about what the original one was.
That makes sense. Yeah, she does other work. She's got a blog. Check out K-Pop Connect, of course. Like you have also written on other Afro-Asian connections. But in general, I'll stop. Where can people find you? Where would you like them to find you? I just wanted to really plug the books for you.
They can find me at KPK K-Pop Collective. My stuff is there. And then I have my professional blog, which is CSA PhD.
Perfect. And I'll link everything in the show notes. Y'all know where to find them. And I want to thank you all so much for listening. I hope y'all had fun. I am curious to know what your favorite generation of K-pop is. You can let me know in the Spotify little question feature, or of course you can find me on socials at CultureX Podcast, and let me know on Instagram, Twitter, ? We'll see how long that lasts. I'm going down with the ship, but every episode I record, I'm like, is it down yet? We don't know. So I will catch you all later. Until next time, keep it chill and keep it nerdy.